Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Let me take you back to 1988, the Summer Olympics, and the moment of those games.
They're away cleanly. Ben Johnson flying out of the block. Can Carl Lewis make up the deficit? Ben Johnson in the lead. Can he hang on? Yes, he's done it. Oh, magnificent. A time of 9:79, a world record. Ben Johnson, what a magnificent performance. An Olympic gold medal.
The legendary Don Whitman with the call there, 9.79 seconds. I can tell you exactly where I was when I watched that race. It was an incredible win for the Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson and a triumphant moment for this country until this news days later.
Good evening. The nation is in shock tonight over the downfall of a Canadian hero. Ben Johnson, who made the country so proud on Friday, was, just hours ago, thrown out of the Olympics for taking drugs, steroids. Johnson has been stripped of his medal and his new world record. Johnson has left Seoul on a flight to New York. He denies using drugs. He says the whole thing was either a mistake or sabotage.
For decades, Ben Johnson has maintained that he was sabotaged in that race. Mary Ormbsy was a sports reporter for the Toronto Star at the time. She covered those Olympics, and she revisits that story in her new book, World's Fastest Man, *, The Incredible Life of Ben Johnson. Mary Ormbsy and Ben Johnson join me in studio. Hello to you both.
Good morning.
Morning. What do you remember about that race, Ben? I said that I can remember exactly where I was when I was watching.
My gold medal.
You remember losing your gold medal, but before that, what was going through your mind?
What was going through my mind then was, I spent the last at least 12 years prepared for this moment. And this time has come, so it's time for me to show the world all the sacrifice and dedication and the hard work and that put it into this. And a lot of people who watch this race worldwide only see what I run from 0 to 100, but they don't see the hard work put it into this. But as a young child, growing up, I'm very proud of myself, what I've accomplished during that time and winning the gold medal.
What did it feel like crossing the line?
It feels good that I do something good in my lifetime, yeah.
In the book, you called the race a Canada versus USA smackdown. Mm-hmm. What did that victory mean?
Well, there was that lead up for about 2 years, actually probably more than that, where this intense rivalry was being built around the world. American Carl Lewis, who was a tall, brash, flashy, flamboyant American sprinter and very good, and Ben Johnson, who was starting to beat him, quiet, understated. But going into the World Championships in Rome, 1987, Ben established there's no faster man on earth than me, because he set a world record in that race too. And Carl Lewis wasn't very happy about it. This intensity and this bitter rivalry kept going right up until Seoul. And, they began sniping back and forth a little bit. Not total trash talking, but some of that. So when it came to actually this gold medal final, it lived up to the hype. And Ben had enough wherewithal not only to run in a world record time, but he had the wherewithal also to turn and taunt Carl Lewis as he's crossing the finish line, puts his finger in the air, and still runs a world record time. It was quite amazing.
And for this country, that it's Canada versus U.S., what did it mean for Canada?
There was this intense, massive feeling of pride. When you're able to sort of give Uncle Sam a little, tap on the side of the face and said the most glamorous event at the Olympic Games, the men's 100 meters, and our guy won it, try to keep up. People loved that. And with Ben being so cheeky by taunting Carl in the end, it was an iconic moment because Canadians didn't really do that kind of thing. You won and you did it graciously. Ben says, screw you.
You talked a little bit about the work that leads up to a race like this. You began running in school when you were a young child. When did you know that you were good?
I was pretty fast. I was still in Jamaica, yeah, when I was maybe 8, 9 years old. But at my age, I would beat most of my friends.
When did you realize that this could be something that you could do on a bigger stage?
I didn't really know I'm going to be a great runner. I just want to see my mother immigrate to Canada in 1972, and I came up here, and the journey started from there.
You met Charlie Francis, who was your coach. In 81, he raised the idea of you. You started working with him. He raised the idea of you taking steroids. Why did you agree to do that?
I believe at that time that as I was told that everybody in track and field or on that level was using performance-enhancing drugs. From what I understand, that the drugs doesn't make you run fast. It makes you help you to train harder so you can recover fast. So a lot of people have to understand this, that sprinter was born, not made. So I just train hard and dedicate my life to track and field, and I spend my whole life running. So I have to see some results in the end.
In the book, I mean, Mary writes about how you didn't really see it as cheating if everybody else was doing it at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah. How widespread was doping at the time? What do we know now?
It was very widespread, not just in track and field events, but in other sports as well. It was something of the Wild West. It was relatively a new thing on scene that they were testing for. The first steroid testing at an Olympics was done in 1976 at Montreal. And the testing was only done generally on competition days. So athletes back then could really decide when to take steroids and when, or whatever else they were using and when to stop. Because if you're only going to be tested on a competition day, that means you can use whatever you wanted to use freely during training periods. And for a lot of people maybe in the sprinting regimes, anabolic steroids help to build muscle tissue and strength and power and all those things. Ben and I quibble a little bit about this because he doesn't think it made him run any faster, but clearly when you can super pump yourself during training periods and recover faster, it is going to help you get at least incrementally faster.
And as you say, there's kind of a clearance period, right? So you can take things and then you stop and then you get to competition when you're going to be tested. And by that time, it's flushed out of your system and you run clean.
Correct. Generally, it was about 3 weeks for these sprinters, or the way they were using it under, Charlie Francis's, program. And by the time Seoul rolled around, Ben and others had been using this program for about 8 years. So in a way, they were quite expert and sophisticated, all things considered, in how they would use steroids. And they would know exactly what they needed to flush their system because until Seoul, Ben had never failed a test.
You'd never failed a drug test before Seoul.
That's right, yeah.
When Charlie Francis knocks on your door after that race and tells you that you had tested positive after winning the gold medal in the men's 100 meter at the Olympics, what was your reaction?
Well, he knocked on the door, opened the door, and see like someone had died. I said, Charlie, everything's okay? And he goes, you test positive. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And I said, they finally got me, which means that my mom's always said to me over the years that the only way they can beat you is in the lab. They can't beat you anywhere else.
In the lab.
But in the laboratory. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, if I'm going to test positive for any performance-enhancing drugs, I want to test positive what I was using, not what I was not using. And this is the problem that puzzled me up until this day.
So you were surprised, like you were shocked when he said that you tested positive?
Yeah, I was shocked.
What was your reaction when you found out?
I couldn't believe it. I was in Seoul. I had been part of the team covering that race, and we got the call about 4:30 in the morning from my boss back here in Toronto and said, get out there and find Ben Johnson. Wires have just moved the story that he's failed a drug test, and I was shocked.
Remind us of the reaction. I mean, this is a Canadian hero at the absolute pinnacle of the Olympic Games, as you said. Men's 100 meter, there's a lot of other great sports. Men's 100 meter is often looked at as the showcase event of the Olympics. From hero to where did he end up?
Well, this really exposed a very ugly underbelly of Canadian sentiment because, as you said, he gets a call from the Prime Minister. There's no brighter star in the heavens in sports than Ben Johnson. And then just really a couple of days later, he's coming home in disgrace. There's a very racist backlash about him, even criminalizing him in terms of the writing. He's getting through the airport like a criminal, a guilty man. And this growing idea that he was an ungrateful immigrant from Jamaica who should go back to Jamaica. The government itself, under Jean Charest at the time, bans him immediately from ever competing for Canada again.
You talk about the cartoon that was with the Kingston Wig Standard.
Correct. 3
panels to this cartoon. What were those 3 panels?
Well, it's quite the triptych because you've got Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson, and then it's Canadian-Jamaican sprinter Ben Johnson, then it's Jamaican sprinter Ben Johnson, essentially. But
that's how he was referred to in the press, as no longer the Canadian sprinter, but the Jamaican Canadian sprinter.
That's right, or Jamaican-born. There was a lot of references to Jamaica, and which is a dog whistle for this black guy let us down. Can you believe it?
How do you look back on how you covered the news?
I needed to redeem myself because I say, what did I miss at the time? And I'm talking more about not challenging evidence that came out in what was become the Dublin Inquiry, a royal commission into what happened in Seoul. We didn't really challenge the experts. We let things go. We just accepted everything. Didn't even look at the hearing, which is at the crux of the book. Didn't ask any questions. So I think I didn't do a good job as a journalist. I can't speak for all media, but we all sort of, drank the same Kool-Aid. Just like, okay, well, we're just going to get through this and break stories around the hearing. And then I have to say, it seemed like an open and shut case. We didn't do a lot more digging. And Ben complicated matters too about 8 months later when, yes, he did confess to using anabolic steroids. So everyone's like, well, nothing to see here. Let's move on. And nothing happened for decades.
When they came and took your medal away, you were there with your mom?
Yes.
What do you remember about that?
Well, it was kind of a sad moment at that point, but I know my mom looked in my eyes and she told me, go with God and things going to be okay, son. And she just said to me, she's not going to be alive to see this day, but everything that they took or happened to me, I will get it back. I just look in her eyes and say, wait a minute, you're not going to be here, so to speak. So, but I just have the faith. And then just keep going through my life and just do the things I need to do and just carry out and everything will come together. So it's been a hard life between what happened with my family. My niece and nephews have to go through this, going to school and have the kids saying these things about them, about their uncle and stuff like that. So it was pretty tough. My mom, take it very tough that see his son going through these things. And my father, when he first heard the news that I test positive, the first thing he said, the Americans are involved. Secondly, he says that the Canadian government have to protect his son. That never happened. So, yes, I was Canadian at once, now Jamaican, which is, I know that. No one have to tell me that. For mostly black folks who hear about that, really hurt. And it also hurt me because I love this country. I came here to do the best I can, not only for my mother, but for the country that I love and I run for, even though, I'm Jamaican. In the end, for Ben Johnson, the sun will shine again because it's already been written, it's already been done by the Lord. And I'm a true believer of Jesus Christ and God that Americans can't believe that there is somebody else outside of America is better than them. And they can't live that kind of thing. So that's what I believe. And not only that, I believe that before I even leave this earth, I want to make sure that my name is cleared and people can see the real truth, what's behind the scene of my accomplishment. And also, Canada didn't ready for my great accomplishment. That wasn't ready for that. Everything comes too fast, too sudden. And if they would have done that, they would have protected me, but didn't.
You believed from the very beginning that you were sabotaged.
Yes.
Why do you believe that? Why do you believe that the testing was sabotaged?
Because people are evil. People will do things to get edge. People do things just to make money and corruption in the sports. There's lots of money was on the table for all the sponsorship. I think it was about $40 million of sponsorship for Carl, and he couldn't beat me.
So your belief is that because you were going to beat Carl Lewis, that there was a larger plan to take you out.
Yeah. One more thing is, I wasn't afraid of testing positive. I was afraid of my life being poisoned or being killed.
That's what you thought could have happened.
It's just a matter of my body break down the steroids that they find in my system. So much steroids find my system that it's crazy what they find. And I came home the next day, went to my family doctor, and it's still on record up until this day that my liver enzyme was off because of all the steroids that I ingested back then.
What do you think happened? This was the theory that was posited by Ben Johnson and his team, that there was something that happened in the testing of, athletes get tested, as we said, and that something happened. This was discounted by a lot of people in the moment. Having done the research in this book and spoken with a lot of different people and looked back on this many years later, what do you think actually happened?
That theory you mentioned, and Ben was referring to, a stranger was in the doping control room with him, and he thought he put steroid pills into his beer when he wasn't looking.
Andre Jackson.
Andre Jackson, yes. I stopped short of a lot of that because I can't prove any of this theory. But one thing that I did find interesting is that the amount of metabolites in Ben Johnson's system, it was very high. So a metabolite is the chemical breakdown of the steroid in your body. So that was an extremely high spike, apparently. And had he been tested normally and failed to test, it should have been a very, very low amount. That's the spike that makes it very unclear to me what actually happened. If there was some shenanigans going on, I don't know if it happened in the doping control. I can't prove it, so I'm not sure.
Do you think he got due process?
No, not at all. In fact, that's what I seize on, because when you look back on it, and this takes it away from the actual test itself, when Ben was at this critical point to have his hearing after the drug positive, it was a very rushed hearing, so it was a bit of a rush to judgment right off the bat. He was excluded from his own hearing by the Canadian team, who thought it was better that he not be there. And Dick Pound, who was an IOC vice president from Montreal, very well known, very powerful VP at the time, agreed to defend Ben and said it was better that you not be there. The Canadians thought he might say something or not behave appropriately, which I think was quite terrible. They're not trusting the guy to be in his own hearing. But we look at how the evidence was used. The Canadians did not look at his drug test at all. They just accepted that science as absolutely unassailable fact. The Canadians were ambushed in Seoul. There was a second secret test that they used on Ben. They didn't disclose it to the Canadians. They didn't tell them they were using this test. It's an unofficial, unvetted Olympic test at the time, which was an endocrine profiling test, which showed, purportedly at that time, that he was a long-time user of this drug. And the Canadians did not push back against that. Not about no disclosure, not about not being able to get an expert to challenge what they just dropped on them. As a Canadian, he would expect to be, have some protections. And as an athlete, he had a right to a fair hearing. I don't think he had that, or due process, or natural justice, whatever you want to call it. And that is quite separate from endorsing his behavior. It's not the same thing. These are two separate things. So that's what we try to, go at in the book and get the answers. Like, is it possible to railroad a guilty man? That's kind of what we look at.
Why do you think he was singled out? Because we've learned a lot about that race in the years following. There was that documentary, they called it The Dirtiest Race in History. There was a book that was written with the same title.
Right.
And the suggestion in that was that just about everybody was on something, perhaps. Why do you think he was singled out?
I don't know. I don't know
You must
why.
have some suspicion.
Well, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you know what? He was an easy target. You have to look at who would benefit or what would benefit if Ben Johnson was removed from the scene. And I will say it just makes me suspicious because he was in the track and field portion of those Olympics. There was only one athlete who tested positive for doping, and it was Ben Johnson. Not a thrower, not a discus thrower, javelin thrower.
And the belief to you that nobody else was taking something is incredulous.
It's ridiculous.
It's absurd.
It's totally absurd. Even if they passed the test, it's absurd.
Just like Mary said that I was the only one they do an endocrine profile on. Now, if they go back and do all those athletes, track and field will be over because everybody will test positive. So I'm the only one they point the finger on.
What would you say to people who might be listening who say that this sounds like conspiracy theories? That come on, this is somebody who has admitted taking performance-enhancing drugs in past. He's a cheat. He got caught. End of story.
Yes, it complicates Ben's story very much. I will totally agree with you that he admitted he was using it after lying about it. That didn't help his case. But that doesn't take away from the fact that he wasn't treated properly at a time when he should have been, a very critical time. People didn't have his back. And I don't think it's conspiracy theory to talk about not getting a fair hearing. It was critical. And the hearing would have, if it had come his way, we're not having this conversation. There is no book. He keeps his gold medal. And maybe, wins a second one in Barcelona after that.
Ben, what would you say to those people who would say that you're trying to rewrite history, that you were caught? That Mary quotes an anti-doping expert who says, why should you have been able to keep your medal? It would have meant that a long-time cheat would have gotten away with it. What would you say to that person?
Well, there's lots of athletes after me test positive. They're banned for 1 or 2 years and they're still running, making a living. Why Ben Johnson's so different from those other guys? And these guys are running on the circuit saying that they're the world's fastest man or they are great and they're making a living. And then I'm going to take the brunt for all those other athletes who never get caught, who get caught. No, I'm the right to defend myself. The system is broken. The double inquiry was just for Canada to distance himself from Ben Johnson, which is fine with me, which is I don't care. Number two is the double inquiry was for me to incriminate myself about me taking $4 in drugs. All said and done, everything is still going on with the sports today. It's just a dirty game. It's just a very dirty game. And I defend Charlie. I defend myself, who in the circle, that we are not the guilty one. This thing is a systematic fraud.
How should we look back at that race now? And how should we look back at that time now, all those years later, do you think?
Well, there's an asterisk against his time, and there's an asterisk on the book, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And in many ways, Ben Johnson was the producer of the greatest high of Olympic history and also the greatest low. And you can't take away the fact that that race actually happened, regardless of who was taking what.
Knowing now what you've gone through, would you have done anything differently in your career?
Well, I cannot say that because I never lived that life. I live the life today and tomorrow. So it's very hard to say what I would do differently. Maybe I could have played football or baseball or something like that, or maybe get a good education or something like that. But my destiny was track and field. That's a gift the Lord gave me, and I use it the best way I can, and that was my destiny.
We're coming up to the Paris Olympics in just a couple of months' time. And people will watch this and they'll wonder whether the athletes are clean, whether this is legit. There's a story of these Chinese swimmers who, you're laughing when I say this, it's the story of a series of Chinese swimmers who tested positive before the last Olympics and were still allowed to compete. How much has changed, do you think?
Nothing has changed.
When Ben says that, that it's a rigged system in many ways.
Nothing has changed in 36 years. And the example you're using is a perfect example of how the system lacks integrity. The athletes and the public cannot trust this system because all along, back in Seoul, it happened to him, and it's happening now to other athletes. There's justice for some and no justice for others. These Chinese swimmers, 23 positive tests, these are positive tests, and they were just, swept away. Nothing to see here yet again. So mercy for some, no mercy for others. And I don't know how they're ever going to fix it.
You were there at the beginning of the story and have spent a lot of time with Ben Johnson telling the story now. How do you think he should be remembered in this country? He's more than a name. He's more than a sprinter in some ways. People have an idea of who he is.
I think he was one of our greatest Olympians who gave Canada one of its greatest moments in sport. And he, at the end of the day, he was not treated fairly as a Canadian should have been.
How do you want to be remembered, Ben?
Me?
Yeah.
In my minds, and many people who support Ben Johnson over the years are not only in this country but worldwide, people say that I'm the best 100-meter sprinter ever lived. And so be it. But never said and done, I want to make sure that the public or the world will read this book, will see the real truth about this conspiracy and the politics and the dirty game and the manipulation of the sports. We are the athletes that made these guys really rich. We are the slaves of make these guys rich. Sponsorship throughout the world, and the athletes gets nothing. They test positive, they throw aside, next. That's not right.
Ben Johnson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Ben Johnson is an Olympian and former sprinter. Mary Ormbsy is a sports journalist and the author of World's Fastest Man, *, The Incredible Life of Ben Johnson.